You'll also notice that there's a resistor shown, 1K and 2W. Okay, the reason for the resistors, we were having noise problems with the servos and faulting, losing step position. And it turns, the reason that you need this resistor, this is called a pull-up resistor. And what it does is it makes the output from this high-speed syncing module go to 0. In other words, this supplies a little bit of load, because when this goes off, there's a tendency for it not to go to 0. It just kind of gets somewhere as close to 0. So the purpose of the resistor is to make sure that it goes to 0, and by putting a little extra load on, and that's how that works. And that solved the noise problem completely. That was and that's a common problem. With needing something to pull things down to 0. It's also a trick you can do if you have, say, the only sensor you have available happens to be a sourcing sensor. You can actually invert it by using a resistor to pull it in one of the direction or the other, and then its output is reversed. So now it's no longer normally on; it's normally off, but it'll work. Sometimes you have to do that because you can only get, say, a sensor in one polarity, and so you just add a resistor.
And it's the same way. It's a resistor that is in parallel with the output cable.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I said, its purpose is to force it. If you're syncing, it forces it down. If you're sourcing, it forces it up. But it makes sure that there's no like wobbly area in the middle where the voltage is, across the threshold. Laptops and USB serial converters to RS-232, they frequently don't work well. And the reason they don't work well is because the RS-232 standard is actually a 12-volt DC standard, and your laptop's USB port is 5 volts. And so the signal, what they're playing with is a ratio between on and off, and it's not a big enough span, and so it doesn't work. It frequently doesn't work. Allen Bradley PLCs in particular won't talk to a USB converter to RS-232. You have to buy a different module, and it's because they fully implemented the RS-232 standard at 12 volts. So unless you have a converter that has a 12-volt supply, it just doesn't work. This power hub, what it does is allow you to disconnect the power from the servo power supply, and which cuts off all power to the motor. Okay, there's not because this power supply is 75 volts, you see, and the 75 volts goes away, but there's an extra 24 volt circuit coming in that will keep the motors holding their encoder positions. The 24 volts isn't enough to drive the motor, but it's enough to the circuitry. The motor sees that and says, "Oh, okay, I can hold my position, but I can't move."
Wow.
So that's a nice feature, because we have, you notice we have 2 of them because they handle 4 motors each. They also act as a junction point between the power supply to run multiple motors on one power supply. Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
nice.
Gary.
Another excellent.
Thank you.